And if that name does sound familiar to you, that's because there are a bunch of Manhattan Project games out already. And this game is not meant to be a continuation of that series, but rather an introduction to it. So this game is a little bit simpler than the other games in the series, and it's designed to introduce new players into what this series offers. And the main mechanism in this game is dice action selection. And the way that this game works is that each player is going to have their own personal player board, but then there's also going to be a main board where players will be performing their actions during their turn. And each player's player board is going to have a warehouse section where they can keep track of how many of each type of resource that they currently own. And then there's going to be a building section where players can add different buildings that they're able to build throughout the game. But players will also start the game with a special ability that they can use, as well as an objective card that they can try to achieve for additional victory points. And on a player's turn, you're going to be rolling the dice that you have access to, and you can re-roll these dice up to 3 times, but each time you roll them, you do have to keep 1 die. And depending on the icons that you roll, that's going to determine which actions you can perform. You'll then be able to split up your dice in order to perform whichever actions you decide, but then any of the actions that you choose are also going to give every other player at the table a smaller version of that action. Most of these actions have to do with gaining resources or converting resources into other resources, but if you do have enough resources, you can also perform the action to build a building. And as I mentioned before, when you do build a building, it gets added to your own personal player board. And the reason that's so important is because once you've performed all your actions, all your dice come back to you, and if you do have buildings available, you can actually place those dice on a building on your personal player board in order to take an additional action. So the more structures that you're able to build throughout the game, the more opportunities you'll have to activate them and get additional bonuses. And this is a really neat mechanism where players will be able to build different buildings from game to game, creating a very different engine. And of course, the player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game.